They all raised their hands, one by one. My sister-in-law, Alicia, stood there like she was presiding over some courtroom drama, a smug smile on her face, like this was just a harmless family game. She asked the question like it was nothing. Should Sarah be uninvited from family events? And then it happened. One hand after another went up. My mother-in-law, Diane, my father-in-law, Mark, my cousins-in-law, spouses I barely knew, every single hand raised, except one, Grandpa Walters. I sat frozen, my 10-year-old son Noah clinging to my side. He looked around the table, confused. His small voice broke the thick silence. "Mom! Why are they doing this?" I didn't answer. I smiled, even though my eyes stung. I stood up and said, "Thank you for the meal." I walked out with Noah beside me and what little dignity I had left. I didn't argue, I didn't cry, I didn't even flinch. But a week later, they each received a letter from a law firm. And inside that envelope was something that made them all go quiet. Sundays used to mean something different. Before my husband Ethan died, they were filled with laughter, barefoot kids running through the yard, garlic bread in the oven, and old country music from Grandpa Walter's portable speaker. Alicia would always yell at him to turn it down, but he never listened. It was chaotic and warm in all the best ways. After Ethan's accident, the silence on Sundays was deafening. At first, everyone was kind. Meals appeared on my porch. Alicia brought over store-bought casseroles and lavender-scented hugs. Diane and Mark insisted I stay close to family. But as the months passed, their concern faded. The texts got shorter, calls stopped, invitations vanished. I had never demanded anything. I didn't argue or cause scenes. I just disappeared. And that's when I realized, without Ethan, I wasn't family. I was a painful reminder of what they'd lost, or maybe of what they never wanted to face. But Noah, he never gave up. He missed them, deeply. He carried Ethan's dimples, his quiet smile, the same way of watching the world. He'd ask, "Mom, why doesn't Grandma call us anymore?" I'd tell him, maybe they're just busy or don't know how to talk about Daddy. It broke me, knowing I couldn't fix that hole in his chest. So I decided to try again, for him. It happened on a Thursday. Out of nowhere, Alicia texted me, "Family dinner Sunday. It would be nice to see you and Noah." I stared at the message, reading it over and over again. It felt like bait, a trap disguised in politeness. But when I told Noah, his whole face lit up. And that was all it took. We arrived 10 minutes early. Their house looked like a showroom, perfect, untouched. Not a single toy or blanket out of place. Alicia met us at the door, all smiles and overly warm hugs. "You look great," she said, brushing her cheek against mine. Her lavender perfume filled my nose, just like always. But this time, it didn't comfort me. It reminded me of control. Noah ran inside to find the cousins. I walked in slower, scanning everything like I didn't belong. Diane was in the kitchen, slicing lemons for her iced tea. She didn't even glance at me, just paused mid-conversation and pretended like I wasn't there. Mark gave me a half-hearted nod from the living room without looking away from the football game. No one said they were happy to see us. I offered to help in the kitchen. They handed me the salad bowl and then left me out of every conversation. Alicia and Diane giggled and whispered, never once looping me in. I smiled anyway. I'd gotten good at that over the years, smiling in rooms where I clearly wasn't welcome. When dinner was finally served, I noticed Noah had already been seated at the kids' table. Alicia served him first, then the others. When it was my turn, I had to lean across the table to grab a plate for myself. Tiny things, so small, but they stacked up like bricks on my chest. The conversation floated around me, promotions, school events, vacation plans. Not once did anyone ask how Noah was doing, or me. It was as if we were guests at a party we hadn't officially been invited to. The only warmth came from Grandpa Walter. He moved slowly now, relying on a cane, but his presence still felt steady, real. He sat beside me and passed me a piece of warm bread. "I'm glad you came," he said softly. "Noah needs to know he still belongs. And you do too, even if they don't know it yet." I swallowed the lump in my throat. Grandpa always had this quiet way of saying exactly what I needed, exactly when I needed it. I looked at Noah, laughing with his cousin Oliver, his plate piled high with food. His eyes sparkled with hope. He didn't notice the way the air shifted when I entered a room. He didn't see the sideways glances or the tight smiles. He still believed the best in people, and I didn't want to take that from him. So I smiled. I stayed quiet, and I told myself I could get through just one dinner. It happened after dessert. We were still sitting around the long dining table, plates scattered with crumbs, glasses half full. The kids had already run off to the basement, laughter echoing faintly through the floorboards. For a moment, I actually believed I had survived the evening. I had done it. I had smiled, stayed polite, endured the cold, and Noah had laughed. That was enough. Then Alicia stood up. She tapped her spoon against her wine glass with a gentle ting-ting-ting, and everyone turned toward her like it was rehearsed. I thought she was going to share some news, maybe something about her kids or some big family plan. So I straightened in my seat, forced a smile, braced myself. Instead, she said, "I think we need to talk about the tension in this family." Her voice was perfectly measured, soft, concerned, almost noble. A sigh escaped her like it was exhausting to carry so much grace. She glanced at her husband, then looked around the table with a furrowed brow. "I know I'm not the only one who's felt it," she continued. "There's just been awkwardness, and I think we should be honest about where it's coming from." At first, I didn't understand. Then no one would meet my eyes, and I suddenly did. My chest tightened, my jaw clenched. "I'm not trying to create drama," Alicia added, with a theatrical shake of her head. "But I think it's fair to say things haven't felt the same since Sarah rejoined us." And there it was. My name, spoken like it was some infection, a whispered rumor, as if I hadn't been sitting right there the whole time. She turned toward me, and for a moment I thought maybe she'd soften. But no. "We know you've been through a lot," she said, that fake sympathy dripping from her voice. "We all grieved Ethan. We all loved him. But we've had to move forward. And I think some of us feel like we're always walking on eggshells now." "Some of us," she repeated, eyes scanning the table. Diane looked away. Mark leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. A few cousins suddenly busied themselves adjusting forks and napkins. Then Alicia smiled, and I'll never forget that smile. It was the smile of someone who already knew the outcome. "So I thought we could just vote," she said. "No hard feelings, just a simple show of hands. Should Sarah be uninvited from future family events, for the sake of peace?" For a moment, I was sure I had misheard her. Surely this wasn't happening. Not like this. Not with Noah downstairs, just one floor away. But then, it began. Diane raised her hand. Then Mark. Then Oliver's mom. Then his dad. One by one. Even people I hadn't spoken to all night. Even the ones who had always claimed to stay neutral. Every hand raised. Except one. Grandpa Walter. I sat there numb, breath shallow. My ears rang. My hands trembled under the table. And then I felt a tug at my sleeve. Noah. He had come back upstairs, maybe for a second slice of cake. Instead, he walked straight into this. His wide eyes scanned the room. Then he looked at me. "Mom," he whispered, "why are they doing this?" And that broke me. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because I did. I just couldn't say it in front of him. I looked down at Noah, his face still soft with confusion, innocence untouched by the cruelty swirling around him. His hand was still tugging gently at my sleeve, as if it were the only anchor he had in a room that suddenly didn't feel safe. My lips trembled, but I forced a smile. "Thank you for dinner," I said, my voice quiet but firm. I stood up slowly, my movements calm, calmer than I felt. The room was silent. Not one person stopped me. Not one of them asked me to stay or tried to explain. It was like they had already decided I no longer belonged, and now they had just made it official. Grandpa Walter rose from his seat, placed a wrinkled hand gently on my shoulder, and whispered, "You don't deserve this." I met his eyes, nodded once, and turned away. I held Noah's hand tightly as we walked out. He didn't say another word, just rested his head against my arm as I buckled him into his seat. He stared out the window, quietly processing what had happened. I drove home in silence. Not the kind of silence that happens when words fail, but the kind that sinks into your bones and makes everything feel heavier. That night, I sat in the dark next to Noah as he slept, listening to his soft, steady breathing. One of his hands was still gripping the sleeve of my shirt like he didn't want me to disappear. My eyes were open, locked on the ceiling above me, my thoughts replaying every moment of that dinner. The glass tap, the vote, Noah's question, and the cruel indifference in their faces. I knew Alicia had orchestrated it all. She planned that moment. Maybe for weeks, maybe for months. It wasn't about peace. It was about power, about erasing me and showing everyone who had control of the family now. And I had let her, but not anymore. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. But that night, I decided I was done being the grieving widow who knew her place. I wasn't going to let them teach my son that silence equals strength, or that being pushed aside was something you had to accept just to keep the peace. No more pretending. The next move was mine. The house was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the rhythmic rise and fall of Noah's breathing. I stayed beside him, my back flat against the mattress, my eyes wide open. My mind didn't rest. I couldn't shake the way Alicia said my name. I couldn't forget the image of their hands raised like a jury delivering a sentence. For years, I told myself silence was strength, that keeping the peace was noble, that shrinking was safer than speaking up. But that vote, it wasn't just cruel. It was deliberate. It was a message, not just to me, but to Noah, that his mother didn't belong, that she wasn't welcome, that she wasn't enough. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake him. I made myself a cup of tea I never drank. Instead, I opened my laptop and clicked on a folder I hadn't opened in a long time. Inside were screenshots, old messages, voicemails, breadcrumbs I'd been collecting for years without realizing it. Things Alicia had said that felt rude in the moment, but now seemed calculated. One message stood out. "You don't have to come to Noah's recital. It might be awkward for everyone." Another, "Diane says it's probably better if you just drop him off at the birthday party. It'll be easier for the other kids." Looking at them all in one place, the pattern became clear. One by one, they had been erasing me, with politeness, with subtlety, with strategic cruelty. I opened my notes app and started writing everything down. Every instance of exclusion, every whisper that questioned my parenting, every carefully chosen word that made me feel small. And then, I opened a browser and searched family harassment legal help. By morning, I had found a law firm that specialized in emotional abuse and reputation damage. I submitted a request. Less than 24 hours later, I was on a Zoom call with an attorney named Danica Rhodes. She was calm, sharp, and didn't flinch once as I told her everything. When I finished, she looked straight into the camera and said, "They weren't expecting you to fight back." "No," I replied, "they weren't. But I'm not doing this just for me. I'm doing it for my son." Danica nodded and asked for any evidence. I sent everything I had. What I didn't realize until she pointed it out was that Noah's smartwatch had automatically recorded audio from that night. It had picked up Alicia's voice clearly. Every word, the vote, the silence, even the moment she said, "She's too weak to fight back anyway." Danica leaned back, almost smiling. We're going to send them something they won't forget. Danica's team worked fast. Within 2 days, every adult who had raised their hand at that dinner received a sealed envelope. Inside was a cease and desist letter, professionally written, legally binding, and undeniably clear. The language was sharp, but not emotional. It outlined a documented pattern of exclusion, targeted emotional harm, and public humiliation in front of a minor. It cited specific dates, direct text messages, and even included transcripts of the smartwatch recording. The exact quote, "She's too weak to fight back anyway," was bolded, printed on official letterhead. And there was more. The letter warned that if any further actions were taken to isolate me or create a hostile emotional environment for Noah, the next step would involve a formal complaint with Child Protective Services and a motion to legally restrict access to my son by any family member deemed emotionally unsafe. I didn't tell anyone the letters were coming. I didn't post anything online. I didn't send warning texts. I just got up that Thursday morning like any other day, made breakfast, packed Noah's lunch, and took him to school. But inside me, something was different. A quiet calm. A deep knowing that I had finally drawn a boundary no one could step over. By noon, the reaction began. First, a missed call from Diane. Then 2 texts from Mark. "We need to talk. This has gone too far." I didn't reply. At 1:23 p.m., Alicia texted me. "Seriously? A lawyer? What is wrong with you?" 10 minutes later, "You're really going to tear this family apart over a stupid dinner?" Still, I said nothing, because it wasn't about a dinner, and she knew it. Danica's letter had made that crystal clear. It wasn't about hurt feelings, it was about harm. The next day, a handwritten card showed up in my mailbox. No return address, just my name, in Diane's familiar cursive. Inside was a folded note. "I'm sorry for what happened. We didn't think you'd take it this far. Maybe we were wrong about you." I read it once, then tucked it into the same drawer where I kept my wedding ring. Not long after, Grandpa Walter called. "Your lawyer gave them all heart attacks," he chuckled softly. "Alicia's been quiet as a mouse." "She deserves worse," I said flatly. "She does," he agreed, voice warm. "But I'm proud of you anyway." That weekend, Noah asked me if we'd be going back to their house. I looked at him, this brave, sensitive boy who had witnessed more cruelty in a single night than many adults do in years. "Not for a while," I said gently. He nodded, then smiled. "That's okay. Can we go to the beach instead?" "Yes," I said. "The beach sounds perfect." 3 months passed. No one reached out to organize another dinner. No one asked if we wanted to visit. No one even pretended to apologize. Not in person, at least. And yet, the silence didn't hurt anymore. It felt freeing. I no longer woke up dreading texts that made me feel small. I no longer mentally prepared myself for passive-aggressive comments disguised as concern. I stopped shrinking to fit into places that were never meant for me. Most importantly, Noah was okay. Actually, he was better than okay. He stopped asking about the cousins. He stopped checking the mailbox for cards that never came. We built new traditions, ones that didn't require me to swallow my pride or smile through tears. Every Sunday morning, we got donuts and walked the lake trail behind our apartment. Noah brought his sketchbook. I brought coffee. We sat on the bench where Ethan used to take him as a toddler, and we talked about school, cartoons, planets, whatever he wanted. There was no tension, no tiptoeing, just peace. I started therapy a month after the letters were sent. It was new for me. I used to think therapy was for people who were falling apart. Now I know it's for people who've been holding themselves together for too long without anyone noticing the cracks. My therapist helped me name what had happened. Not just exclusion, but emotional abuse, manipulation, bullying dressed up in smiles and casseroles. She gave me the language I didn't know I needed, and once I had the words, the shame started to loosen its grip. She told me something I'll never forget. The vote wasn't the betrayal, It was just the final act in a betrayal that had been building for years. And she was right. I wasn't angry anymore. Not really. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to hurt them back. I just wanted Noah to see what real strength looked like. Not the kind that yells across a table, but the kind that walks out with dignity and never looks back. Strength, I realized, is choosing not to explain yourself to people who have already decided they don't care. Some people said I overreacted, that it was just a vote. But those people have never sat silently at a table full of people pretending they don't see you. They've never had to smile while holding back tears, just so their child wouldn't feel the rejection happening in real time. I didn't send that legal letter to be dramatic. I did it to protect myself, to protect Noah, to draw a boundary that words could never hold. I gave them years of kindness, of understanding, of silence, years of giving them the benefit of the doubt. I gave them every opportunity to treat me like a human being, like the mother of their grandson, and they responded with cruelty, disguised as civility. They counted on my silence. They mistook it for weakness. They were wrong. I've learned something else since then. Family isn't sacred just because it's blood. DNA doesn't give anyone the right to mistreat you. A last name doesn't excuse manipulation, and loyalty doesn't mean tolerating pain. Family is something you build, intentionally, carefully, with love and respect. And I'm building ours from the ground up. Every Saturday, Grandpa Walter still comes by. He and Noah play chess, badly, and eat too many sugar cookies from the corner bakery. He never brings up the others, and I never ask. The silence between us is the good kind, the healing kind. Last week, Noah looked up from his coloring and asked, "Do you think they miss us?" I paused, considering my words. "Maybe," I said, "but missing someone doesn't mean you treated them right." He nodded thoughtfully and went back to his drawing. He's growing up with a kind of quiet wisdom that takes most people a lifetime to learn. For a long time, I thought my story was about being pushed out, but now I see it for what it really was. A story of walking away, of realizing I didn't lose a family, I escaped one. And in doing so, I made space to build something softer, safer, and completely ours. If you've ever sat in silence, ever been underestimated, ever kept the peace while they kept pushing, you're not weak. You're stronger than they know. And sometimes, walking away isn't the end, it's the beginning. Because there's a kind of power in silence when it's no longer forced. There's a kind of strength and peace when it's finally yours. And there's a kind of healing that happens when you stop fighting to be included and start choosing where you truly belong.